This is for Democratic leadership and Democrats in power. I don't know what you're doing if you're acting like things are normal. You are not protecting the norms because the norms are gone. Your job is to stand up for the American people and our health and our safety, even the ones that voted for this, because most of them didn't vote for this Project 2025 shit show, this purge of government corruption watchdogs, the complete shutdown of cancer research, or the public's knowledge of health information or food recalls. We didn't vote to invade Mexico or buy Greenland. We didn't vote to send less money to veterans and more money to private prisons. We didn't vote for the billionaires to get everything while we got nothing. So your job is to be loud and clear that that is what's happening and then to get in the way. Please, on behalf of literally the majority of this country who still believe in democracy and human rights and personal freedoms, find your fight or get out of the way for the warriors that we need, because the president is surrounded by yes men. So we need you out here saying no.
Welcome to the Ken Harbaugh Show. I've got Leigh McGowan on. You don't need any introduction to this audience, Leigh. Everyone knows you as PoliticsGirl. But I got to tell you, your latest rant, sticking it to Dem leadership for not sharing our sense of outrage. You know what? I was worried about this interview. I still am, because I don't know how two pissed off people can have a cogent conversation. We're going to try, but we have to maintain that sense of outrage and anger in a strategic way. That's the challenge, right? Being strategic in our outrage.
It's true. I mean, Mark Cuban actually today tweeted, the Dems need to be strategic. And I wanted to respond right away. Dems need to be conscious. You know what I mean? Like at first, like strategic is great, but they also needs to wake up, right? Yeah. Like it is very, very important to understand how government works, to facilitate within the bounds of the rules, except the other team is literally not playing by the rules and hasn't been playing by the rules for a good decade. And at this point, we look like suckers to continue to play the game by the rules and tell everyone, don't worry, everybody, we're playing by the rules. And everyone's like, but we can see that they're cheating. Like they're stealing from the bank. They're doing the thing. It's like, it's embarrassing. And it doesn't make us look, as I said in the rant, it doesn't make us look like the grown-ups in the room. It makes us look like patsies. And I don't think that the Democratic Party is short on actual leadership. I don't think they're short on some really wonderful leaders, but what they are short on is the courage to do the right thing, even if it doesn't serve them. And I think at this point, there's a number of them who are so used to the status quo that the status quo remains for them. They're not going to lose their health care. They're not going to lose their children are not going to be rounded up. They are not going to lose their Medicare. That's not something that's going to happen to a member of Congress. So it is very possible that the way the system has been built, it actually facilitates not making change. And in some ways, it has to be outside people pushing them to make the change. In some ways, I think very deeply that we need to start our own Tea Party movement on the left side. You know, the Tea Party, they came about during the Obama years because they were outraged, and they were outraged at the president, and they were outraged at his plans. And they started a movement to push their own party. And in some ways, that Tea Party movement made room for the MAGA movement, right? Like without the Tea Party movement, there would have been a no MAGA movement. And I think, what if you could use that kind of power for good? And I kind of feel like that is what we need to be doing right now.
Have you consulted Joe Walsh on this? I don't know if you've had Joe Walsh on, but that would be an interesting perspective, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, the thing is that I really just feel like at this point, we need people who are standing up and saying this is wrong.
Yeah.
Because I think everyone knows it. But sometimes when you don't see what you know to be true reflected, you start to second guess yourself. And I think that that's what people are doing. They're like, why aren't they fighting? How come they didn't say anything? How come Elon can just say this, that, and the other thing and no one cares? And I think people do care, but they need to say it, and they need to be brave enough to say it and bold enough to say it. And I think sometimes courage is contagious, and as is fear. So we need a couple people brave enough to start saying what the truth is loud and unapologetically to give other people the cover to do the right thing.
I've got a very small sample size for this observation, but it seems like the younger members are the ones who are finding that courage to speak out and then inspire others, which in some ways goes against my theory about this modern political era, which is that if you're younger than a certain age, this is normal, right? My kids have grown up with nothing but Donald Trump making controversies and being at the top of the headlines. But it's the young reps and even the young senators now who are calling this what it is, which is an aberration. This is not how America is supposed to operate. And the old guard, for the most part, seems to be content to just wait it out, see what happens next. I'm not sure what's going on, but you hit a lot of these points in your rant. I hope you don't mind me calling it a rant.
No, it is a rant. I mean, it's called breakfast rants, and then I moved it to kitchen rants because that's where people know me from, right? No, it is a rant. It's absolutely a rant. But I think that's the thing. I think the old guard is that, and I don't say this as an ageist thing, but they are just that, an old guard. They've been there for a long time. They're entrenched in the soil of the way the Beltway politics have always worked. And the new younger leaders, the AOCs, the Maxwell Frosts, people like that, Jasmine Crockett, they come in and they say, wait a second, why are we doing it like this? How come we're not calling that out? Wait a second, that's wrong. And it is such a breath of fresh air for those of us watching it from the outside, because we say, that's what I'm thinking, but how come no one says it? I must be wrong. And then you see a congressional representative standing up and saying, that's wrong. And you say, oh my God, I'm finally reflected in what I'm feeling in myself. And I think we need way more of them. And the problem is that we're not encouraging younger people to run because our older people are not moving along. And I don't mean that again to be ageist. I mean, you can't possibly understand the needs of someone 40 and under if you are 70 and up, because you lived in a completely different America. And if you're making rules and laws and legislation that you are never going to have to live with because you own your home and you never worried about sending your kids to college, and you're not taking care of your aged parents, and, college didn't cost what it costs now. They have not been your problems. They were not your problems, and they won't be your problems. So how could you possibly care enough to solve those for people? I find it very interesting that it's the young reps who are often talking about gun violence because they have grown up their whole life having these drills in school. And I heard Bill Maher very sarcastically asking David Hogg recently on his show, why are you guys so anxious? What's with your generation? You're all so anxious. And I was like, wow, to ask that of someone who not only lived through a huge school shooting and has become an activist because of it, but just without the awareness of the world that group of youth have had to live through. Like you said, your kids are like, they haven't known anything other than Donald Trump. My son is the same. He's turning 17. Really, the only president he really ever remembers is Donald Trump. And then this brief, stint of Joe Biden. But it's not like the 16-year-olds were really like engaging with Joe Biden. He was a representative of a different era of politics. In some ways,
his presidency was also defined by Trump. It was, the reaction to Trump presidency. It wasn't Joe Biden's presidency. It was just the interregnum between two Trump terms. Yeah, it's been all.
And ironically, he did a beautiful job. And if we are able to hold off this rising authoritarianism, and we ever actually have true history again, I think history will look back and know that what Joe Biden actually did in the 4 years he was given were some of the most progressive, forward-thinking pieces of legislation we've seen since FDR. But right now, we're just going to rip on him because that's the person that we can blame for everything.
We do need an accounting for how we failed to communicate the achievements of the Biden administration, for how we failed to pin on Republicans and on Trump things like Project 2025. I mean, I was so happy with myself in the run-up to the election. After the DNC and the elation we felt coming away from Chicago. And I'll be the first to admit, I got it wrong. I thought it was going to be close, but I thought Harris was going to win because I understood my country differently than it turned out to be. I'm coming back around, though, to this idea that we have a communication problem, an information problem as a country, less than a character problem. I mean, there are character issues, right? I'm not going to write those off. I mean, thinking about the 1,500 pardons, right? There are bad people out there, but I think we missed the mark on communicating the achievements of the Biden presidency and the dangers of a Trump 2.0.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think you and I feel the same way. I think I felt like, did I have a lack of imagination here, imagining that this man could win again, knowing all we know about him? But I think what it comes down to is a lot of people just didn't know all that we knew about him. A lot of people just didn't believe it, or they actually didn't know. I mean, from places that are considered news deserts, places where people don't read the news at all, it went 19 points for Trump. Do you know what I mean? Like, he just seemed like a leader, right? He just seemed like the strong kind of presidential character that we want. And I think we can't pretend that we don't have a misogyny problem in this country and a racism problem in this country. And like, I'm the first to tell you, if the Democrats run someone for president, I am a bold, strong, feminist woman. And I'm like, please run a white man. Like, I just want to win. At this point, I want the policies I need. I need them to take care of us. And if the country is not ready for a woman leader, that's sad. That's our problem. We need to get over that. But I would like to win. So yes, we definitely have a messaging problem. But a lot of that comes from our lack of laws around disinformation and misinformation and what you can say on television and what you can say when you call yourself news. We never addressed that. We didn't look into it, from the fairness doctrine in the 80s when that was removed on to the creation of cable news, to the rise of people like Rush Limbaugh and Fox News, and no one holding anyone into account. No one's saying we need to, beef up our slander laws, or we need to beef up what you can say to the American people, because why shouldn't they believe it? Of course you should be able to believe your president when he says something. Of course you should be able to believe your news channel when they tell you something is true. I had many, many fights on CNN leading up to the election. I kept flying back to New York just to give the truth a fighting chance on that network. And I would go head to head with someone like Scott Jennings, when he would say, I don't even know what you're talking about. You keep trying to sell this lie that Project 2025 is Donald Trump's plan. It is absolutely not his plan. And I said, that is a lie, Scott. And now look where we are. It was absolutely always his plan. The people like me, like you, that were out here saying, here's what they're going to do. That's exactly what they're doing now. But there's a disconnect between what we were saying and what people actually heard. And so we do need to figure that out. But also, I think a lot of people are going to figure it out for themselves as they watch the lies in action.
Yeah, well, they are so proud of that Project 2025 lie. That's one of the most grating things about the loss. I mean, we were shouting from the rooftops and it just didn't reach enough people. Your observation about those information or news deserts, I think, is one of the most important takeaways from the loss. I mean, where you could not get impartial news, you voted for Trump. And I think that ties directly to that other stat that if you believed disinformation about immigration, the economy, and crime, you voted for Republicans by like a 30-point margin. It was off the charts. You stopped your litany of disinformation at Rush Limbaugh, but we have to carry it forward to like the digital era and Zuckerberg and Musk, because those news deserts are worse now. It's not just a lack of information, it's keeping the desert metaphor, it is a poisoned well. Every time these folks get their news, it's drip fed to them in these clickbaity ways that is pure disinformation. So it's not just a lack of news, it's toxic news.
Absolutely. And there should have already been, which goes back to what we were saying earlier about the age of people in Congress. There should be people there that understand tech better, that understand social media better, that understand, God forbid, coming up, AI better, that could have put legislation and regulations on these industries, because they certainly have the technology to catch fake news. And if we had put a financial restraint on organizations like Meta that said, if you are spreading disinformation, if you are allowing it to be spread, if it's coming from a network like CNN, we will sue CNN. If it's coming from you because it's just, say, someone like me posting it, then we're going to sue Meta. And I'm telling you, they would have gotten rid of that right away because they have ways to track what we're saying. They're just spreading misinformation and hate and distrust because it makes more clicks. But they have algorithms that can do it. They just choose not to. And it doesn't serve the people in any way because we don't have the right information. I watched a woman this morning talking online about how our taxes are just bills we pay to Democrats, and Donald Trump is going to get rid of all of our taxes. And she's straight up believing that, and I think, okay, Kamala Harris's plan was to not tax anybody more if you made under $400,000 a year. Donald Trump's plan is to tax everybody who makes under $360,000 a year more. So it was rich people will be taxed, or anyone who makes less than $360,000 a year will be taxed. And that's the one we chose. And this woman is saying with her whole heart that she's so excited because she's going to stop paying taxes. And then we're going to have more money in the country because Donald Trump's going to put tariffs on everybody. And then we're going to have more money. And I'm like, no, we pay the tariffs and we're paying more taxes. So how does it serve people? We really need to find a way to get back to common sense thinking where we say, actually, here's what's happening. And they're lying to you because they want you to vote for them so that they can steal more of your money. Because what we're seeing right now is literally a backup of a dump truck so they can gouge the entire federal government and drive away with all of our money. And most people need to understand that.
It's Ken Harbaugh. Quick break to say thank you to everyone who supports this show via Patreon. We're adding exclusive content every week there, so if you haven't signed up yet, head over to patreon.com/Ken Harbaugh. Every single cent we get through Patreon goes back into this show, whether it's researching topics like the piece we recently did on the U.S. Army's counter-fascism training during World War II, or my reporting trips to Ukraine to show what that country is doing to defend its democracy. These episodes can't happen without your support. I'm deeply honored that so many of you have pitched in. If you've been waiting, now would be a great time. We've got another reporting trip to Ukraine coming up and other ambitious projects in the works. We're all in this together. Thanks for everything. I saw an analysis that the day after the election, the net worth of the billionaires that wound up on the stage with Donald Trump during the inauguration went up by $64 billion in one day because of the outcome of the election and the impact that had on their options or whatever it was, their stock portfolios. I am wondering if there is, back to the word strategy, a strategic way to make this about that without turning it into class warfare, right? To make it about the pillaging of the American economy for the sake of an elite few who support Donald Trump at the expense of the rest of us, without turning us against each other in ways that never end well historically.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think we're going to be against, there's an us and them in America now, no matter what we do. I really think it just depends on who the us and who the them is. And I think that a class war is better suited to most of us because most of us are not in that ultra wealthy, class. And there are certain ultra wealthy people that are quite well aware that it shouldn't be like this. There was that great actor from Canada who's been in the Marvel movies, and he was all over the media this week being like, it looks like my taxes are going down. He's like, look, I do really well. I should not be saving money. Like, there are tons of people that need to be saving money. He's well aware that his taxes shouldn't get lowered, right? There's a lot of people that even if we criticized and we said, these people are making too much money, they need to pay more taxes, we need to have an ultra wealth tax, we need to have that kind of a tax where you get to a certain income level and you're going to be taxed at a higher level, because it just makes sense. When America was quote unquote great, this time where everybody thought we were the best, our marginal tax rates for the ultra rich were 70 to 90%. You know what I mean? Like, they're lowering all those tax rates now. It's currently at 21% for corporate tax rate, and they want it down to 15. What people don't understand is that's not just money that these billionaire corporations and ultra rich people aren't going to be paying, so they get this great tax cut. It's money that won't be going into the American economy. So this idea that we now have to cut Social Security or Medicare or Medicaid or Meals on Wheels or, SNAP, that helps feed people that don't have enough money just so we can afford to pay rich people more is idiotic. And I think if we're going to do an us and them thing, it's the way to go, because that sort of ultra rich versus the rest of us, oligarchy versus the ordinary, that's not going to alienate people like Mackenzie Bezos, because she gets it, right? Like, she's giving money away hand over fist because that's the way it should be if you get to that level of rich. I can't even imagine being that rich and not being like, let's replant the rainforest. Let's solve child hunger. Let's build homeless encampments everywhere so people can get back on their feet. I can't imagine not wanting to spend it to make the world better. These people that have got to this level of wealth, they've lost perspective on humanity completely. And we've given them all the power over us. Like you said, it's the front row at the inauguration, right? These are the people that are now making all the decisions for the human beings that live in America. And they're no longer living like human beings. They live above us. They don't even understand our lives. So of course they don't care if we cut our health care or our SNAP or our food benefits for children. There was a Republican on television recently just talking about how hungry children in school are bloodsuckers of the economy. And I was like, oh yes. And he's like, and have you ever noticed that the poorest people are the fattest people? And I was like, that should outrage us. And it should outrage 90% of us. And I keep saying at home, like, I have this image in my head of this picture where a whole bunch of people are bent over with a tabletop on top of them. And then these big, rich, fat cats are eating this huge, beautiful meal on top of the table. And the image says, what if they stood up? Right? Like, so many of us are here hunched over, taking what we can so that the very richest can have everything. But there's so many more of us. And I don't mean this in like a get your pitchfork and let's go, but I certainly do mean this in get your metaphoric pitchfork and let's go, because we need to stand up to this or they will take it all from us in literally 6 months and we won't be able to fold it back. I think we need to be loud now that this is unacceptable, which is why, back to the beginning of this conversation, we need to be pushing the people who have microphones, our representatives, to do that before it's too late.
I imagine over the next few weeks and months, there will be almost no constituencies left that haven't been hurt in some way by Trump's juggernaut of executive orders and unlawful actions, firing the IGs. I just heard that suicide counseling at the VA is being scaled back because it has special consideration for LGBTQ plus veterans. So can't have that. So let's not talk about suicide prevention. Everyone's going to be hurt, and it's going to be up to leaders and influencers to marshal that outrage in a way that translates to political results. That's a real challenge, but it has to be done.
It has to be done. I mean, Ken, you're a veteran, and you know what they're doing to the veterans right now. It's not just scaling back at the VA. I mean, they're talking now about not giving disability if they're also giving retirement. You know, like, that'll change people's lives. They won't be able to afford food or rent. And these are our heroes, our country's heroes. And again, that brings me back to the majority of us that are underneath that table and how we need to say, like, this isn't okay. And we're not okay with this. And if you are a Trump voter, you could say, you promised me something I'm not going to get, and now you're hurting my people. And so not only did you lie to me, you are now hurting my people. And I think that should make everyone want to stand up and fight back. And I really do think we need to do it sooner rather than later. I mean, how are you feeling with the Hegseth nomination as a veteran yourself?
Yeah, I'm feeling gutted, but I'm trying to be analytical about it. And I have a couple of really tough takeaways, and they're indictments of our own side. I mean, I was a contemporary of Hegseth's, 15, 20 years ago. A lot of us ran in the same crowd, and the right invested in him. They identified talent early on. They made it so he never had to worry about a paycheck, right? They just cleared the way for him. Even after multiple scandals, he gets the spot at Fox News. They just have a strategic approach towards grooming talent, right? And we
Yeah.
don't do that.
No.
We just had Chris Goldsmith on, who went head to head with Pete Hegseth in those days. Chris was on one side of the Iraq War. Pete was a champion for the Iraq War. That should have been disqualifying all by itself. And Chris, he'll tell you this himself, is struggling to make a go of it as a counter-fascism researcher. Meanwhile, his contemporary of 15, 20 years ago is the Secretary of Defense. We got to do better at identifying and investing in talent. And, that's one of the, I guess, instructive things I've taken from the whole Pete Hegseth experience.
Well, I think you make a really good point, and it goes back to your original question about strategy. I mean, the right wing of this country are far better strategists. They are long-term strategists. Everything from the Reagan years on, we're seeing come to fruition now. The overturning of Roe, that came from 1973 on. They made a long-term plan to overturn that, and they did. But even messaging, they invested in their right-wing messengers. You were mentioning earlier, like even the right-wing social media ecosphere, the Charlie Kirks and the Ben Shapiros and the Candace Owens, and they invested in them and their voices. Joe Rogan is Joe Rogan because somebody paid him $125 million to do his show, right? And people take him seriously because of that. That's an investment. And then you look at something like the Federalist Society and investing in, like you're saying with Hegseth, they put money into these young conservative justices, judges, law students, and they brought them all the way up until they became a Brett Kavanaugh.
Yeah.
And they could jam him through onto the Supreme Court until they became an Amy Coney Barrett, and they could jam them through. We didn't do that. And it's an incredible strategy. It's very impressive. It's just terrible for the country. And so, yes, we need to have a strategy like that. And it might not be in my lifetime, in your lifetime, but I certainly have to try and make a difference in our children's lifetime.
Yep. I've seen that time and time again, from FedSoc while I was at Yale Law School to, the nonprofits I led that struggled because we weren't aligned with the right. Somebody did a side-by-side of the billionaire philanthropists who support left-leaning causes, and it was like $6 billion to $1 trillion. I mean, we are completely swamped by the money that the right has at its disposal to fund organizations like FedSoc, right? Federalist Society.
And yet, I mean, here's the thing. The right wing gets so much money from the billionaires because they're going to benefit from the plans that the right wing put into effect. I put in $500 million into someone's campaign or into the Republican campaigns, and I'm going to make $2 billion in tax cuts later. So it's all a write-off for them. The left-wing billionaire donors are not going to get tax cuts for the things that they're benefiting. Their money is going to go and help things. They're going to spend money. They're not making money. So it's first of all, we're fighting a different war. But then you look at something like what happened recently with this AI thing in China. They only had a certain amount of NVIDIA chips. They only had a certain amount of money. So they had to be more innovative. They had to think differently. And they were able to create something not only stronger, better, with less money, but they left it open, which undervalued everything that was happening over here in America that they thought they had the whole market on. And it's crashed our personal stocks. And I think, but they were innovative. They had less money, less resources, and yet look what they've done. And maybe we need to see that as inspirational for our side of this political fight, that we might not have the resources they have. So it means we have to be more innovative. If you think about movies from the past, like Steven Spielberg did not have a lot of money for Jaws. So he was only going to use that shark sparingly because he couldn't afford that stupid shark. But it made the movie so much better because he had to be more imaginative. He had to be more real. He had to build it up with music. It created the careers of people like John Williams. We need to have that kind of innovation as a party, which is why it goes back to fight back now, be the people that we want to get behind, give us, a soundtrack in which to watch the opposition fight back.
And in the military, we refer to that as asymmetric warfare. I'm all peaceful protest only. Don't misunderstand me. But yeah, there's certainly a model for that. Last question. because I know you're out in LA. How are you doing? How does it feel now that the fires have died down and you can look around and survey just the enormous scope of the damage that you have to now deal with and rebuild?
Yeah. Look, what happened in Los Angeles was an absolute tragedy. It does not matter what you hear from right-wing media ecosphere or from Donald Trump's mouth. There is not a fire department in the world. There's not a water system in the world that was ready for what happened. And a lot of it was due to natural causes. 100-mile-an-hour winds with that amount of fire, in an urban area, those urban water systems, you don't fight a wildfire with fire hydrants. You just don't. We need to get in the air, and they couldn't get in the air. So anyone that's saying, oh, this happened or that happened or this thing, this was bone dry or these fired, there's a reason for all of it that most people don't care about. But the bottom line is it's the climate. The climate is changing all over this country, and we ignore it at our peril. We have ignored it for decades, and we're only seeing the results of that coming to fruition now. And we see it in Florida. We see it in North Carolina. We see it's snowing in New Orleans. The climate is changing because the earth is getting warmer. And this is exactly the time that our new president is backing us out of the Paris Climate Accord and getting rid of our environmental regulations. And these are things we need to fight back, because living through it here in Los Angeles, it was terrifying. It was terrifying. And I keep saying to people, if you've lived through a hurricane, imagine that with fire, because that's what we dealt with. And I have lots of friends who have lost their homes, who are displaced from their homes. We have friends who have lost their children's school. It is an absolute tragedy. And I think an even bigger tragedy is watching our government politicize this to the detriment of the American citizen, because we're not a blue state. We're an American state, right? We vote a certain way, but we certainly weren't saying to Florida, well, listen, here's 15 hoops for you to jump through before we help your people get off the roofs of their houses, right? No one did that, because that's not what Americans do. We take care of each other. We're a nation, and we pay federal taxes to go to things like FEMA so that if there is an emergency, it'll come to us. And the fact that this is now being used as a political cudgel to hurt the people of California because we quote unquote didn't vote the right way is a stain on the entire nation. So I'm very sad that it's becoming politicized, because so many people are suffering here, and they're not Republican voters or Democratic voters or voters at all. They're just Americans who need help.
Well, our hearts go out to you, Leigh. Let's check in on that again soon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Ken.